Hello. It's really frustrating that we're not meeting together for worship today. I'd love to look around and watch your faces as I ask you what were the 5 points that Jamie highlighted last week. I'm sure some of you would have been absolutely blank. Well, if I'm honest, I would probably have been like that as well. Uh, well, so for my benefit, if not for yours, here's a reminder. 1. Vision. 2. Prayer and action in equal measure. 3. A bold plan of vision and action. 4. Recruitment of people, a corporate enterprise. 5. A determination not to be discouraged. Yes, all those 5 points came out of Nehemiah chapter 2. Today we move on to chapter 3 and we begin to see the enormity of the task in hand. Until we really stop and think about it, I'm sure we do not understand just how vast this project was. In lockdown and with very muddy footpaths across the fields in our area, Anne and I often tramped the streets of Whitchurch, trying to wend a circular route around the outskirts of the present town. In an hour, we may cover around 2.5 miles. That was the distance around the walls of Jerusalem, 2.5 miles or 4,118 metres for those of you who are more modern. And the wall was 40 feet high, 12 metres. The apex of the average modern house is around 25 feet. So the wall was really high. And then it was 8 foot thick. That's 2.5 metres. Probably some stretches of the wall were less badly damaged than others, and possibly much of the stone and the rocks from the earlier wall had been discarded fairly nearby. And then there were 10 gates and some towers. The gates had to be made of wood and hung on hinges. Let's be in no doubt that the people were undertaking an absolutely massive task. The city gates were seen as vital. They were intended obviously for defence, but they were also places for trade. And they were places where the city leaders met and talked and discussed, and where court proceedings were held. To give an idea of what we're talking about, here's a picture I took of the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem in 1997. I asked Mike to read a limited number of verses today, not only because for us the names are so difficult to pronounce, but because the chapter is essentially just a list of names. Or is it? Is it? No, it's more than just a list of names. First and foremost, it gives recognition to all of those involved in the task. It tells us who they were, where they came from, where they lived, what they did for a living. It is so important to recognise the contribution that people make. That's important in Beacon Church today, where we rely entirely on voluntary contributions of time, skills and money. But it's also important today in our COVID world, where many people are going way beyond the call of duty, whether in a paid or voluntary capacity. It's important to acknowledge how hard our NHS staff are working under enormous pressure and in some very distressing circumstances. It's important to acknowledge the contribution of care workers, again battling infection and the mental health needs, particularly of elderly people, many suffering some form of dementia. It's important to acknowledge the difficulties schools staff are facing, providing lessons both online and face-to-face in many cases. It's important to acknowledge how grateful we are to our emergency services for their continued help and support as they protect us. It's important to acknowledge that many others, through their daily work, keep our essential services running, our shops open. The list is almost endless. And it's important too to acknowledge the hard work being undertaken by, for example, our food bank volunteers and the many others who are helping their neighbours and in the neighbourhood in so many different ways in these difficult days. It's important that we recognise the efforts of everyone, whether they're able to give a little or much, in terms of time, of skills, of money. So just a list of names? No. But I wonder if you noticed the first name on Nehemiah's list. It was Eliashib, the high priest. The religious leaders were not exempt, and they are not exempt, nor are those who hold positions of authority and responsibility. They need to lead not only by words, but by example. And Eliashib did just that, together with his fellow priests. But note that Nehemiah had the priests work on the sheep gate, the gate through which the lambs for sacrifice would have been driven. Nehemiah put people to work where they had an interest. He put them to work somewhere they felt was valuable. We see that many times as we work through this chapter. And as we go forward as a church, it's important that not only does each person feel valued, but they feel the task they're undertaking is worthwhile and it's important in its own right. As we continue to look through Nehemiah's list of names, as well as priests, we find goldsmiths, we find merchants. There are perfume makers. There's no indication that they objected or raised a stink. But something that probably did stink was the dung gate through which all the muck and bullets would have been passed to be burned in the valley of Hinnom. And who rebuilt that gate? It was Malchijah, the son of a district ruler. Note too that in verse 12, Shallum, son of Helohesh, ruler of a half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. Everyone was included, everyone got involved, everyone helped. No task was too big or too small for anyone except the nobles of Tekoa. Verse 5 tells us the next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisor. Well, there's always one, or perhaps a small group who feel that for whatever reason they should be exempt. Perhaps the task is too menial. Perhaps the task involves getting hands dirty. Perhaps, well, we all know that that can happen. I do hope that that continues to prove not to be the case within Beacon. The citizens of Jerusalem all needed to play their part in the rebuilding of the wall. Today, the church is no different. We all need to play our part. We all need to contribute what we can in terms of time, skills, and money. So the body of the church needs you to function effectively. So what of Jamie's 5 points from last week? Vision. Nehemiah outlined the vision, and the people had enthusiastically bought into it. Prayer and action in equal measure. Nehemiah concentrated the people's minds on prayer and action. The plan was indeed bold, as we've seen today, a massive plan involving 2.5 miles of wall and lots of hard labour. Recruitment. Nehemiah did indeed recruit a small army of people from all walks of life, with all sorts of fundamental skills, all ages, both male and female. And the people could have so easily become discouraged. The task was so big, the work so hard, the obstacles so great. But they encouraged one another by working together and in cooperation with one another. Discouragement is like a cancer. It can quietly eat away at our enthusiasm, our determination, and our effectiveness. We're in this together, and we're in this because we love the Lord Jesus Christ. We're in this because we want to serve him. We're in this because we want to see his name glorified. And for that to happen, Jesus must be at the centre. Jesus is the centre, and Jesus must remain the centre.